Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. My name is JM and this is a show where we hang out, we talk about gaming, we talk about things that inspire us in our gaming. And one of the things that we're talking about today is Malazadvent, which is our little tribute to the Malazan Books of the Fallen Empire and all of the other ancillary stories that Stephen Erickson and Cameron Esselmont wrote. I actually get to interview them later today, which is insane to me. So, if you want to watch that, tune in at 2 o'clock Central here on Twitch and on YouTube. We're going to be talking with both authors. We're going to be talking about the themes of the series. We're going to be talking about their plans for the future, but we're also going to be focusing in on the gaming origins of the Malazan series. So today we're going to be talking about what I'm calling the Genebackian threads. There are several books that take place on the continent of Genebackis, which is in the Malaz world. And so we're going to talk about 4 books primarily. We're going to be talking about Gardens of the Moon, Memories of Ice. Don't worry, I got this. Toll the Hounds and Orb Scepter Throne. And so, spoilers for all of those books. And my apologies if you're watching this and you're like, no spoilers. Hopefully there won't be as many spoilers in the interview this afternoon on Beyond the Table, but I can't make any promises. So the series is old, so at this point, go out there and read that. So, the first half of the show, we're going to talk about what's going on in these stories, and the last half of the show, we're going to talk about what things we as gamers can pull out for our campaigns. But before I do that, let me just say good morning to everyone in the chat, to John and Mark and Tink and Rook. Good to see all of you. So, we are first introduced to the continent of Genebackis and all of its strange inhabitants in Gardens of the Moon, the very first book that was released in the world of Malaz. In fact, it opens, not initially, we get a little bit of background on Captain Paran, but when we finally get to the main story, it follows the Bridge Burners and Dujek One Arm's host, which is this major army from the Malaz Empire, which has invaded this continent. And it's wrapping up this massive campaign, climaxing in the Battle of Pale. And we are immediately thrown into the mix of this strange and wonderful world. Pale has been resisting the Malazan Empire. There's this big enfilade where these powerful high mages, the High Mage Tashrin and Tattersail and Harlock and these other mages are fighting this strange group known as the Tisti, which we find out later, are these, dark-skinned elves from the realm of darkness, like capital D darkness. And they inhabit this floating mountaintop city known as Moonspawn. There's strange people called the Moranth. The Moranth, you never see them out of their armor. They fly on these winged insects called quarrels, and they make munitions, which are essentially alchemical grenados. And they have a hatred, a vendetta against Pale. So there's this brutal culling of Pale. We meet Anamander Rake, the leader of the Tisti and perhaps the son of the Mother of Darkness itself, Mother Dark, a demigod of some sort who wields a sword which consumes souls. Later on in the series, we encounter the city of Darujasan, the city of Blue Fire, this jewel in the center of Genebackis, this wealthy merchant city that everyone wants to control. It's run by a council. There are strange people in there. There's an assassin's war going on. We meet Krupp, perhaps a fan favorite here at Iconic, who is the eel and trying to work with to keep Darujhistan free. There's also references to this thing called the Torud Cabal, this group of mages and creatures and entities that is trying to protect Darujhistan from something. Over the course of just the first book, we also meet things like the Jaghut, which are, again, this sort of orcish, ogreish race, and we meet the Jaghut tyrant. The tyrants were a specific kind of Jaghut who became so obsessed with power that they could force every living thing in a radius to their will and subsume their minds, down to the blades of grass. We learn about the Talanamas and their war with the Jaghut. The Talanamas used to just be the Amas. They underwent this ritual to make themselves undead. They can travel as dust, and we see this through the eyes of Tul, Onos Tulan, this undead warrior who is hunting the Jaghut tyrant. We meet even stranger folks in later books. Genebackis is home of the Segula, which is this race of warrior monks who, once you attain a certain rank, you wear masks that have your number on it, and the higher the mask goes, or the lower the number, the more powerful of a warrior you are. And in Memories of Ice, we discover that they have decided to declare war on an entire kingdom, the Panian Domain, and so in doing so, they send 3 warriors, and that they deem is enough to destroy an entire kingdom. On the northern end of Genebackis, we encounter the Toblakai, a race of giants. Karsa Ulam being the main character that we meet. There's a little bit of Genebackis in the first book of House of Chains. They wield blood oil, which has this magic deadening property that makes them incite with rage and lust. We encounter the Panian Domain, which is the most horrifically evil empire ever created in fantasy, in my opinion. They are described as a cancerous wildfire that is just slowly expanding from their center, leaving nothing in its wake. And their plan is to encompass the entire world and then let it all die. You have the Seer Domain at top, those who follow the Panian Domain, but the majority of the people they encounter are, the Tenescauri, the cannibals. They don't feed their people, so their people march as this cannibalistic army on the edge of expansion. And even darker things that we won't talk about here on Twitch. We encounter strange creatures such as the Kachain Chamale, which were the dominant species on the planet before the arrival of the Tisti and the Amas from their own warrens. We see them in the form initially of undead dinosaurs with swords for arms. This entire continent could have been the entire focus of the series. And yet, I've still got 2 more streams to do on the other 2 main continents of this series. And so over the course of these 4 books, what we see is the first 2 books, Gardens of the Moon and Memories of Ice, we see the Malazan Empire dealing with their conquest, and in some ways their very failed conquest of Genebackis. They've just been engaged in a 10-year-long war that has essentially ended in a stalemate. They won, but they go to conquer Darujhistan, and they end up being outlawed. This is where even heavier spoilers are coming in. They end up being outlawed because of the rise of the Panian Domain. The Empire outlaws them so that they can ally with their former enemies in the war, the Tisti, Caladan Brood, and his army, who's this warlord who's an Azathani, which is some sort of also god, to stop this Panian Domain. And so they ally together and they go to war, a war that sees the bridge burners and one arm's host come to an end. And even the Tisti transform. They go from living on this rocky outcropping moonspawn to inhabiting the city of black coral. And then the authors walk away from Genebackis for a very long time. It's not that Memories of Ice is book 3. Book 4, we get a little bit of northern Genebackis with Karsa's story, and then we don't return to it till Toll the Hounds, perhaps my favorite book in the series. So much epic things happen in Toll the Hounds that I can't really even talk about all of it. We see Dasim Ultor on his quest to kill Hood, the god of death, leading him to the city. Karsa arrives in the city after journeying on other continents and coming back to the continent of his home. Karsa on his quest to destroy civilization and return everything to villages, because villages would never allow anyone to die alone, or in the streets, or in suffering. In fact, Karsa delivers this beautiful speech that ends with, dying in the arms of someone who forgives you. Is there anything more loving? I'm paraphrasing. It just breaks me every time I read it. Yes, Rook. The Panion Domen, man, that was rough to listen to and imagine. We encounter demigods, gods, men and women who ascend to godhood, undead warriors, martial artists extraordinaire, creatures of terror and nightmare. We see the undead returned to life. We see one man's compassion and raise him to godhood. And we see the fallout of that. We see what happens when powerful creatures clash. There are 2 massive fights between god-tier characters in the streets of Darujistan at the end of Toll the Hounds. And then the last of the Darujistani and Genebackian storylines resolve in Orb, Scepter, and Throne. Again, spoilers for Orb, Scepter, and Throne. We learned that the tyrant is not dead. Even though we also discover that there are these things called the Houses of the Azath, which trap powerful entities to limit their influence on the world. And the original Jaghut tyrant from Gardens of the Moon is trapped in one. But we discover that the tyrant is eternal, and that if the Jaghut cannot produce a tyrant that will rule the world, then humans will. We learn the reason that the Moranth created their munitions. They have a lot of enmities with a lot of people. We see an ending to storylines that started in Gardens of the Moon. Tayshrin gets an ending. That is wonderful. Dealing with the Karul, who is this elder god who created the wards, who created the ways of magic. He is reawakened in Gardens of the Moon and is slowly being infected by... It's actually on Genebackis that we first are introduced to the primary antagonist of the series, the crippled god. This god who is summoned from another reality, a completely different reality that is antithetical to ours, and he is summoned to destroy this kingdom, the kingdom of Kalor, the High King, and is bound to the flesh of the earth and is constantly having to be rebound, and he is infecting Karul's warrens. That storyline comes to an end in Orb, Scepter, and Throne. We discover the true nature of the Torud Cabal, and some characters that we thought were dead really aren't, and what Krupp was actually attempting to prevent from happening. Yes, kind of like if you put pasta in antipasta, it explodes. right? There's three types of matter, John Doom. Matter, antimatter, and then of course doesn't matter. And you can mix doesn't matter with any other form of matter and nothing happens. What I just described was enough for any fantasy author. That was a huge, complex interweaving of storylines across 4 books. And yet, that just is, man, less than a 20th, less than 20% of what the series actually covers. I didn't even get into the Barghast tribes and the whole Barghast conflict that gets resolved, and then where the Barghast come from and the rise of their gods, and the fall of Fenner and the rise of Treach as 2 different aspects of the gods of war. Or even Bauchelain and Corbel Broach, the two of the funniest characters in fantasy fiction, full stop. So that's the overview of the Genebackian threads. There's a lot. And on these threads hang multiple other stories that we'll cover when we talk about Seven Cities, and Lether. Man, I'm telling you, Rook, Gruntle is the mortal sword of Treach, which we talked about last time, as this mortal sword is sort of the fist of the god. The reluctant, unwilling, except when he gets really angry, then he's more than willing. Gruntle's story ends in Dust of Dreams or Crippled God, and my friend BC, when he finished Crippled God, said it's the only series he got to the end of and felt like he needed to go out and pour drinks out for friends he lost along the way. And so that's what we did. We ended up having whiskey and talking about our favorite scenes and deaths and characters throughout the book. So coming back to this thing, Behind the Screen is really a focused on gaming. And we talked about how, man, this series started off as their gaming group. Erickson and Esselmont taking turns in the GM seat, each trying to one-up, outdo, surprise the other character. So I was thinking about what lessons can we learn as gamers, as players, as GMs from the Malazan books. And I think there's several of them. Aside from the obvious, which is just reading this series will inspire your own games and game worlds. Tanar, which is my main Gygaxian fantasy world, is heavily inspired by Books of the Fallen and Malazan Empire. Sun Animander, yes, the 7 Sillies. Yeah, there's the 7 Holies and the 7 Cities, and then the less talked about 7 Sillies, which I really think Iskarol Pust is looking for. I think that would be the height of his it would be his coup d'etat over Shadow Throne if he were able to find and assemble all 7 of the 7 Sillies. So the first thing I would say is sometimes as GMs, we want to rush to the good stuff because we worry that our campaigns are going to fizzle out, peter out, people are going to move away, people are going to lose interest. And from my own experience, the best payoffs in games are the ones that arrive in their own time. So much of what happens in Toll the Hounds and Orb, Scepter, and Throne could have been dealt with in Gardens of the Moon or Memories of Ice. And yet, both authors understand the importance of the scale of time. It's one of the things that we kind of joke about in modern D&D games is, right? Like we go from level 1 to 20 in what amounts to a couple of months in world time. Slow things down. Let things percolate. Let things sit. Don't be afraid to let things wrap up later when the story gets to a more organic point. I would say never be afraid of letting your players or the dice change the world. We see characters ascend. We see beloved characters die for what we feel like are very stupid reasons. Like a knee injury. They just won't get checked out. In Toll the Hounds, this may be an apocryphal story, but I have heard it said that when one of the two large confrontations between these godlike characters occurred, that Erickson rolled a d20 to see who was going to win. Pinnacle! Good to see you. Welcome to Malazadvent, or Malazadvent. Those are sometimes things we're not willing to risk. Well, what happens if I give my character too much power? What happens if I truly let the dice decide what's going on at the table? I think there's a reason that this series is so deep in both world building and characters. Because both authors, when they were playing their characters, allowed these things to sit with them. I would also point out that death doesn't ever have to be the end. Talk the Younger, one of the characters in this thread, falls into a warren of chaos in book 1, somehow survives and makes it out in book 3, has something really horrible happen to them in book 3, dies and is reborn. And then in book 10, dies and is reborn again, twice in the final series of the book. If you are playing in a high fantasy world, to quote Ghostbusters 2, death is but a doorway, time but a window, and I will return. Phantom, Kirk, it is so good to see you, buddy. Yes, killing the Darling is always a good motivation for the reluctant. Erickson said that the Malaz world was discovered instead of created, which is another thing that I have here on my list. Let the dice, let the characters, let the players expand and tell you some of the things that are going on in your world. Man, I'm with you, Son Animander. Talk probably was praying for the sweet, sweet release of death multiple times in that series, and yet, in death, gets his happy ending. Also, never be afraid to blow something up. When in doubt, let the gods fight. If a character calls on their god and pulls them to earth, maybe he has to find a new god. Let the consequences of playing in a high fantasy game really be real, beyond just, does my character make it out of the dungeon or not? If you've got a cleric in the group, they are literally in contact and a conduit for their god's power. It's why we called them conduits in Crucible of Realms. Right? There's a connection there. There's a two-way connection there. If your character does something cool and absorbs magical energy, maybe you do let them start to become a god, and they end up as a patron or a warlock patron in your next campaign or later in your campaign. In Chinar, several of the patrons and deities in the 8th Age are former player characters from the 7th Age game. That goes back to our timing. Don't be afraid to run multiple games in your same game world. And there's two things that go with that. So first of all, the advice is don't be afraid to run multiple games in the same game world. Long term, running subsequent games in your game world allows you to build on the lore and the characters that you established in the previous campaign. If you're playing in a D20 game, or hell, Savage Worlds, the next campaign's gods and kings and rulers and villains are the player characters who reached legendary tier or level 20. I mean, especially in a D20 game, level 20, you have your new gods and demigods and warlock patrons rising to the surface. But also, because don't be afraid to run multiple concurrent games in the same world at the same time. This is what I'm going to be doing with Vendom, which is my new Jackals campaign that I'm launching. All of my Jackals games are going to be set not just in the same world, but in the same area. And things that one group does will affect things that other groups does. But last but not least, I think we can really take inspiration from the Malazan series because Erickson and Esselmont were both GMs and they were both players. And there's a style of gameplay that I used to really engage with when I ran Rifts, and hopefully someday when I have retired and we're sitting around and we're just playing games nonstop, which is the goal. I want to harken back to my days of playing Rifts, although this time around it'll either be Rifts or, of course, Savage Rifts, which is... Go buy Savage Rifts. That's my plug. And it's a style of play called troop style play. And I think the title troop play comes from Ars Magica, which is a role-playing game set in mythic Europe. And the idea there is there's not one primary GM. That the GMing seat rotates around the table, and that each person has their time to add and run in a creative shared world. I've talked about my Rifts group quite a bit, where, again, 8 or 9 of us were GMs, and so we would just show up and say, all right, who's running today? And everyone would be in the same shared universe. All of the characters knew each other and were interrelated. It grew to something a la DC or Marvel Comics continuity. That is something that you guys can engage in immediately at your game tables. Say, all right, we're all going to play in the same world. I'm running this campaign with this characters, and there's kind of 2 ways to do it. I'm running this campaign with these characters, but every other week we're going to switch off, and Rook is going to have a completely different group of characters. If you read the Genebackian threads, you'll notice that there are multiple groups of wildly different power tiers, but each kind of doing their own thing that sort of threads together, right? You can do that. You can do that in troop style play, where you have multiple groups going around kind of doing the same things, and maybe the GMs kind of talk about, hey, what's going on? But it allows every GM to also have a character that they're playing. Another way of running troop play is, hey, when the group splits, I'm going to run the group that's going to place X, and Ben, you're going to run the group that's going to place Y. You know enough about the world, just go with it. Whatever you say in game is canon. In Ars Magica, they had something that I feel is very Malaz-like. So everyone played a mage. So everyone had their super ultra powerful reality-changing character. Then everyone had a mystical servitor, some sort of empowered familiar creature. Well, it was a human servitor, but maybe it was an elf or a werewolf or something like that. And you could not play your own servitor. So immediately now we have ultra powerful tier, better than human tier, but we're all someone else's servitor. And then you had kind of your grunts, and everyone else had like a grunt that was another character's grunt. There are actual terms for this in Ars Magica. I just haven't played Ars Magica in about 20 years. Grogs, maybe, is what it was. But anyway, the idea was, oh, Ben's character wants to go do this quest. Well, he can take his servitor, which is played by me, and his grog, which is played by Tink, and a couple of other adventurers that get added in. And suddenly now we have a side quest run by somebody else with players that are all tied in and around Ben's character. I think it was on Pyramid Magazine. I don't remember if it was John Wick's Play Dirty articles, or if it's something that I took out of the Play Dirty articles and came up with on my own. It's been an idea that's been percolating in my head for about 25 years. But another way to do this would be kind of like running a Justice League game, where we say, okay, everybody makes their superhero, and then each of us also makes a character in that superhero story. So the idea would be, all right, if Ben is playing Batman, I'll play Commissioner Gordon, and someone will play Batgirl, and someone will play Robin, and in Superman, somebody's playing Crypto, and somebody's playing Supergirl, and somebody's playing Jimmy Olsen, all the way around. And so we have, 6 players at the table. All right, 6 adventures, each focused just on your group, or your superhero and their group. And then, bam, the big threat happens, and then all of us play just the superheroes as they come together to fight the Justice League threat. Damn, I may have to run that in Necessary Evil. I think that could be a really fun way in Savage Worlds of running this idea. But anyway, that's troop play, which is, I think, a major aspect of the Malazan books. So that's it. That's our look at the Genebackian threads. Next week, we're going to be looking at the 7 cities stories on Tuesday, and then the litanies of Lether. I think I like this sort of alliteration. Tink, write those down. Those were good. And that'll wrap up our kind of Books of the Fallen and the ancillary tie-in stories. And then the last Tuesday that we're streaming of the month, which is the following week, we're going to just kind of talk about what's remaining in the Malazan books. But today at 2, if you're at all interested, if you want to hear 2 really great authors, really intelligent guys, talk about this fantasy series and talk about its origin in gaming and its themes of compassion and power, we're going to be here at 2 o'clock, going live, talking with Stephen Erickson and Ian Esselmont. So, hey, thanks, Pinnacle. I appreciate that. Thanks for all the support on that. And yeah, we'll be back at 2 o'clock. Litanies of Lether and the 7 Cities Stories, Tink. So, that's it for today. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and I will see you all on Tuesday for more Behind the Screen. Till then, have a good one.